Power, live from Washington, D.C.
From Bloomberg's Washington, D.C. studios to our TV and radio audiences worldwide, welcome to Balance of Power. I'm Joe Matthew. We begin with breaking news this evening that's moving stocks. President Trump announcing just moments ago the U.S. will allow Nvidia to sell its H200 chips in China in exchange for a 25% cut, ending weeks of speculation about whether Nvidia would be granted permission to sell these AI chips, which are a generation behind the new Blackwell GPUs. Now, the president also writing in a social media post in which he announced this, quote, the same approach will apply to AMD, Intel, and other great American companies, unquote. All three stocks are rising in after-hours trading, and we're going to have a lot more on the stock reaction in just a moment. Joining us first now with the latest on the political side of this is Bloomberg's Wendy Benjaminson here in Washington. Wendy, it's great to see you. There have been huge questions about the national security implications here and whether the president is bartering with our safety. How should we look at this?
Well, you make a very good point, Joe. I mean, the whole reason that this is an issue is that previous administrations had closed the chip market to China so that the U.S. could have an edge in all sorts of applications for this, right? So it was to protect our national security. China would have to either make its own chips or figure out or buy the inferior ones, the H200 chips, which China said they didn't want.
That's right.
So now Trump, who is the most transactional president I think we've had in a long time, is looking at this purely from a business perspective. He is looking at this as the U.S. will get a 25% cut out of this tremendous market that Nvidia is going into. Nvidia gets the win. Apparently, the other companies, AMD and Intel, will as well, presumably also with a cut to the United States. And national security, you know,
Really? Okay. Well,
Yeah,
so
it
does this
seems to
come
be.
down to relationships? Jensen Huang has become quite close with Donald Trump.
Right.
The administration has put its chips on AI, but it's also enriching others. If you look at the likes of AMD and Intel, does this simply come down to Jensen Huang being able to pick up the phone?
I think it does. And you remember they were off to a bit of a rocky start. In fact, at the very beginning of Trump's first term or second term, he even said, like, the board should replace Jensen Huang. He's a loser, or words to that effect. And then, very smartly, Jensen Huang decided, I better get in good with this guy or things are going to go wrong for me. And he has really worked to build up this relationship, as other tech moguls have.
Right. Certainly, the boss at Intel went through something like that. But in terms of Nvidia here and the broader AI theme, Jensen Huang has made the point repeatedly that America's stack is what the world should be on to win the AI race. There have been competing ideas here surrounding national security, Wendy. Right. Does this mean that we've made a decision on that?
Apparently it is open to the world to use to get these highly advanced American chips. And it is part of Trump's push to increase U.S. manufacturing. And he says there's a jobs component, and there is. But there has always been before this balance, national security versus finding other ways for Americans to have jobs or to build manufacturing. And Trump is really all about, you know, bringing that manufacturing back to the United States. This is one way to do it, because the old factories, the steel mills and the textile mills that he talks about longingly aren't coming back. So this might be one area where he can actually bring that back.
Another fascinating moment, Wendy. Thank you so much. Wendy Benjaminson with us in Washington as we turn now to a special breaking news edition of Power Moves with Bloomberg's Nora Melinda, who's looking at all the stocks we're talking about from her perch at World Headquarters in New York. Investors like this. Nora, what do you have?
Well, I'm looking at shares of Nvidia in the after-hours trade up more than 2%. We really are seeing a positive reaction to this news here that Trump is potentially allowing this to be seeing some sort of change here when we think about the H200 chips from Nvidia into China. Of course, we know this has really represented a large portion of the company's revenue, but we have been seeing the stock still remaining resilient despite the fact that they have been dealing with these restrictions. Jensen Huang, the CEO, has really reiterated over and over that he'd like to re-engage this China market. But when we think about the H200 chips and we think about the China market more broadly, investors don't necessarily see this as a lifeline for the company, but definitely an added bonus. So So this just really speaks to just the policy shift here, and it really just provides more optimism as we think about Nvidia, AMD also being mentioned, Intel. You are definitely seeing shares of these companies up in the green right now as we look at the after hours trade. We are seeing some really positive reaction to this news right now, Joe.
Well, really fascinating and nice, I guess, to see some green on the screen after hours. But one of the biggest stories we were watching here before this popped, Nora, was the whole Warner Brothers Discovery deal. Now that Paramount has launched a hostile takeover in competition with the bid we discussed and what we thought was a deal last week with Netflix. How'd this play out today for investors?
Well, I'm looking at shares of Paramount Skydance. We're seeing them up at about 9% at the closing bell today. Of course, we really are seeing this company upping the ante here as we look at the war that's been going on between Netflix, Paramount, Skydance, Comcast, all vying for Warner Brothers Discovery here as we think about the studios that they're looking for and the streaming access that they really are vying for in this moment here. But as Paramount is coming through here, launching a hostile takeover bid at $30 a share in cash, you really are seeing positivity as you see shareholders of Paramount, Skydance really digesting this news. But all eyes still continue to also be on Netflix. You were seeing on Wall Street analysts actually downgrading the company. You're just talking about there were concerns about the idea of Netflix taking on this asset as we think about them potentially being able to have access to HBO Max. We already know that Netflix is the largest streamer in the world, so adding this to the portfolio would definitely be an added benefit. But there is some caution that we are hearing across Wall Street as to whether or not this is something that Netflix actually needs in this moment.
Nora, thank you so much. Bloomberg's Nora Melinda with us live from New York. Thank you. We continue on that news of the fight over Warner Brothers now and zero in more closely as the president weighed in just a short time ago on this. Take a listen.
I have to see what percentage of market they have. We have to see the Netflix percentage of market, Paramount, the percentage of market. I mean, none of them are particularly great friends of mine. You know, I want to do what's right. It's so very important to do what's right.
It's a deal facing questions over antitrust laws, government interference, and more. We're going to get into all of that in just a moment here. Joining us now with more insight into this fast-moving story is Gigi Sohn, consumer advocate and broadcast marketplace, former counselor to FCC Chair Tom Wheeler, who was herself nominated to the FCC by then-President Joe Biden in 2021. Gigi, it's great to have you with us here on Bloomberg TV and radio. Based on what you've heard from these two deals, and it sounds like this could go either way at this point tonight, are either of them a better proposition for the consumer?
Well, I don't think so. I mean, let's take Netflix, Warner Brothers first. You'd be combining the #1 streamer with the #3 streamer. And as it is, I can tell you, I've dumped Netflix because once it hit $27 a month, it's like, I'm sorry, I'm not going to pay that anymore. So you're naturally going to see prices go up. So it's not good for the consumer. But it's also not good for theater owners, actors, producers, directors, writers. I mean, Hollywood is in a tizzy over this, and rightfully so. Because it will mean less opportunities, less movies, less opportunities for all those folks. So there's good reason for Hollywood to be upset. Also, I would think that pay TV distributors, you know, cable companies, satellite companies would also be upset because this would allow the combined company to raise their prices to them to carry content as well. So it's not just
streaming prices going up either way, because you'd think, you know, if they're making more money, they might make more movies, but you clearly don't see it that way with the potential for one less studio.
Not necessarily. No, right. You're combining two studios, and necessarily you're going to have fewer films. And that similarly with Paramount, if Paramount were the victor here, it's a similar problem, right? You're going to combine two studios. You're going to have fewer opportunities for writers, actors, producers, and also you also have the problem of the ability to leverage the two, you know, the content against pay TV distributors, theater owners. So both of these, in my mind, are not good deals for the consumers. They may be great deals for, you know, Warner Brothers Discovery, but really not great. And you also have to think about other consolidation in the market. Charter and Cox want to merge. There's other discussions about companies merging. You know, when you have this kind of consolidation, it just isn't. It is rarely better for the consumer.
Well, it's interesting. You know, there's been a lot of talk about the White House thumbing the scale here. And I wonder what you make of the political side of this, because I have to admit, I can't really tell who's leading in that regard. We know that he's close to the Ellisons. And we know that we've learned today, based on reporting from Bloomberg, that the Saudi Sovereign Wealth Fund is involved by way of Jared Kushner's affinity partners. So if the Ellisons are involved, Kushner's involved, you think that maybe they're leading. But then you look at Truth Social last evening. Apparently, the president heard about the 60 Minutes report, and he says, I hereby demand a total apology, though far too late to be meaningful, from Leslie Stahl and 60 Minutes, referring to Paramount, he said. They are no better than the old ownership who just paid me millions of dollars for fake reporting. So who's in the lead?
Well, that's fascinating, because it was interesting to hear that clip that you ran that said the president said, well, you know, I don't have a preference, because a few weeks ago he had a very strong preference for Paramount. He said, I think Paramount should get Warner Brothers Discovery. So obviously this is new news. But I think the point you make is the most important point, is Trump is the wild card here, right? He is going to try to put his thumb on the scale. The problem is, one way or another, the problem is that if he puts his thumb too heavily on the scale, a court is going to look at that. If whatever deal that comes about is challenged, a court's going to look at that and say, no, you can't have political interference. And antitrust is, again, that is a criminal enforcement proceeding. Okay, so you can't just put your thumb on the scale that way. So there's some risk to him putting his thumb on the scale. And the 60 Minutes report, I'll be honest, I hadn't heard about this. But I think it levels the playing field a little bit more if he's angry right now at CBS.
Well, they had an interview with Marjorie Taylor Greene that he didn't like very much. To your point, by the way,
that's right.
The president talked about this. Well, that's what got him upset. He was on the red carpet at the Kennedy Center last evening, asked about this. He referred to Netflix as a great company. When they have Warner Brothers, he said the market share goes up a lot, so I don't know. He said that's going to be for some economists to tell. Quote, I'll be involved in that decision, too. He's on the record in that regard. But let me ask you about cats and dogs living together here, Gigi. When you've got Mike Lee and Elizabeth Warren on the same side, you know you're in trouble. Mike Lee on Twitter, on X, buckle up for an intense antitrust hearing in the Senate. Elizabeth Warren, not exactly a close friend, referring to Trump being involved in deciding if Netflix can buy Warner Brothers. She says, is that an open invite for CEOs to curry favor with Trump in exchange for merger approvals? What is this deal exposing here with regard to the administration?
Well, is it a surprise to anybody that the president is interfering with what the Department of Justice is doing? I mean, look at what happened the last several months, right? I mean, he tells Pam Bondi, go after my enemies, and she goes after her enemies. So in a lot of ways, this is nothing new. But I will say that, you know, whoever the loser is here is going to challenge whatever deal gets approved, and a court is going to look at very carefully whether there was political interference in the determination. So there is a huge risk in the president getting, too handsy on this transaction. And the fact that he's already said, I'm going to get handsy, does not help.
Yeah. Well, I think we're going to be talking about this for a minute, Gigi. Thank you so much for the insights. Gigi Sohn, good to have you with us again on Bloomberg. And coming up, we're going to get back to the breaking news that's rocked the market this evening. President Trump saying that the U.S. will allow Nvidia to sell its H200 AI chips to China, should Congress have a say. We'll talk to a key member of the Senate Commerce Committee coming up next on Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio. Breaking news here on Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio. I'm Joe Matthew in Washington. Thanks for joining us. With the breaker coming from the White House this evening, the president ending speculation over Nvidia's H200 chips, announcing on social media that the company will be allowed to sell and ship the H200s to China. We're watching shares of Nvidia rise in after-hours trading, along with shares of AMD and Intel. Both of them were also mentioned at the end of the president's post to be set to receive similar treatment when it comes to China. And for more on this and other stories we're following, we welcome Republican Senator Jerry Moran of Kansas, a member of the Senate Commerce Committee that oversees mergers, for instance, like one we're talking about today with regard to Warner Brothers and also deals like these. He's as well a member of the Senate Agriculture and Intel Committee. So we've got a lot to talk about, as always, with Senator Moran. Welcome, sir, to Bloomberg TV and radio. I'm wondering your first blush reaction to this, if it's a done deal, and if the Commerce Department, or the Commerce Committee, I should say, will have a say in what many worry is a breach of our national security. What do you think?
Well, leave it to Bloomberg to break the latest news, which I just learned this as I was coming on camera. But I would say there is a role for the Commerce Committee to play. This has huge consequences. This is clearly about our country's economy in the future, but it's also, perhaps more importantly, an issue for our national security, our national defense. You mentioned in introducing me that I'm a member of the Senate Committee on Intelligence. And it seems this is right up our alley to make sure that we get briefed and have an understanding as the White House moves in this direction. And we look forward to doing that. But what I have to say is it's a very important decision, one that needs to be made with great caution and care for our economy and for our well-being.
Well, it's really interesting the way you answered that, because you could have taken the path that I tried to set you on by way of the Commerce Committee. But what does the Intel Committee think about this, and will there be a briefing? Is it something the president can do on his own, or must the committee speak as well?
No, I don't think there's any requirement that the committee speaks, and but I mean, we have the opportunity to speak, and I think the ability to have this discussion, this conversation, learn the facts, get the details is something that is important for the Intelligence Committee to do, and we can do it behind closed doors. And without the politics of the issue, just with hearing what's going on, what the recommendations are from our intelligence community, and what their reaction is.
It's not the only thing I want to talk to you about. I'd like to get into this Warner Brothers merger as well. But what questions should we be asking about the distribution of high-tech AI chips? Because Jensen Huang at Nvidia will tell you and make a very effective argument that to win the AI race, we must allow for sales like these, Senator. Is there some truth to that?
I think there is truth to that. I mean, we want to play the role, the most significant role in the manufacturing and distribution. We want other countries to be requiring our involvement in the expansion of this industry around the globe. The United States needs to be at the forefront, needs to be the superpower when it comes to AI and super chips. And so every opportunity in which we can expand our capabilities and our economy around the globe is important, as long as it's done in a way that doesn't diminish or distance ourselves from being the safe and secure country we need to be. All of this is based upon competition, and of course we know that a lot of global powers are interested in defeating us as the world leader. China in particular, and so we need to make sure we do it smartly, but I don't think there's a way that you can look the other way and the end result of that is that somebody else is taking the lead and we're left behind.
I'd love to know your thoughts on the latest involving Warner Brothers. Now it's a hostile bid from Paramount, and it's apparently going to involve money from Infinity Partners. That involves Jared Kushner, the president's son-in-law. There's money from the Saudis here, Senator. What kind of a review would this deal require? Does this make you comfortable?
Well, I never know until you hear all the facts, and you've outlined some of the features of this potential merger, this acquisition, and I would say that there's a lot of information that's yet to be heard, and my view is you want this merger, these acquisitions to be done in a way that's based upon what's good for the well-being of the American economy, and not about the political powers or plays that come with the lobbying and the influence that's attempted to see that they're approved or disapproved. Mergers and acquisitions, antitrust, those issues need to be front and center in regard to what you do on the merits. And I try to put politics aside and let the experts, Department of Justice, Federal Trade Commission, FCC, and others make these decisions based upon their professional judgment as compared to the political machinations that go on with every one of these, because there's so much money involved.
Yeah, this is a potentially big one. Would those agencies, I guess they'd have the final word, but would the Commerce Committee hold hearings preemptively on this, or do you wait to hear what the administration?
No, I mean, we have, in other mergers and acquisitions over the years, our Commerce Committee, of which I'm a senior member, but would defer to the chairman, Senator Cruz. I can very well see, I mean, we've seen this in the past in which we've put front and center the opportunity for us to be educated and garner the information that helps us make decisions. Because while I say it needs to be decided by the professionals, there's no question but what we get asked the questions, and we have the opportunity to weigh in if we choose to provide guidance in the direction. Again, the free market system only works when there's competition, so it's a hugely important issue for Congress, and it's front and center for every Commerce Committee chairman to be engaged in these broad kind of topics about the future of our economy and the well-being of our country.
Well, as usual, you find yourself at the center of a number of stories, Senator. I'd like to ask you about farmers in Kansas, because the president today is also making news about farm aid and what some call a farm bailout. Bloomberg was the first to report this and confirmed by the president in an Oval Office event. Actually, was, I think, in the cabinet room a short time ago, where he had a couple of farmers wearing 10-gallon hats and the agriculture secretary. $12 billion will be the payments made to farmers to make up for damages, I guess, accrued here in the president's tariff regime. Is this a tacit admission that tariffs are a problem for American business, and is $12 billion enough?
Well, I don't think we heard anything from the White House suggesting this is related to tariffs. And I think lots of farmers in Kansas and across the country look to the administration to negotiate trade deals that the tariffs allow us to have the leverage to get a better deal. We've looked a lot in agriculture in particular. There's been so many countries that have kept our agriculture commodities out. And so this is a negotiating technique, opportunity. Tariffs certainly have a consequence in agriculture. Our relationship with China is hugely important for soybeans and grain sorghum in particular. That gap, when China is not buying what we produce, it's impossible to fill. So trade and tariffs come together, and particularly when it comes to China. But we also need to use the tariffs we have in place to negotiate better trade agreements with our friends and allies, as well as our semi-adversaries. And $12 billion, I mean, what really is the challenge for farmers today is the commodity price is so low, but the input costs are so high. And particularly in states like mine of Kansas, where the drought has been prevalent for the last 2, 3, 4 years, our farmers are not in a financial position in which they can weather the challenges that they face today. The economy has been so bad so long, you can't afford another year. So this is front and center. $12 billion is certainly helpful.
Yeah, I've only got about a minute left, and I'm loath to cut you off, but I have to ask you about this Boeing deal that I know you're supporting. They're bringing Spirit AeroSystems back into the family, a near $5 billion deal, having spun off the company in 2005. This is the same one that was blamed, Spirit AeroSystems, over the door panel blowout last year on a 737 MAX. Does bringing this company back into the fold make Boeing a safer product?
It seems that way to me. When I heard of the merger and acquisition, and Kansas has a long history with Boeing, some ups and downs over the years. And the example is when they spun this manufacturing aspect of Boeing off to a different company and created Spirit. Spirit was created to do that. I mean, Boeing left us 20 years ago. And so we have these ups and down relationships. But I think from a Boeing perspective, but more importantly, from a safety and aviation perspective, having that supply chain under one set of management, one team, having it under the Boeing umbrella and its direction, I think is really valuable to the company and to the countries and to aviation in general in our country.
I appreciate that. We covered a lot of ground here. Republican Senator Jerry Moran of Kansas, we thank you as always. I'm Joe Matthew in Washington. Much more ahead as we turn to the Supreme Court next on Bloomberg. It's Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio. I'm Joe Matthew. Thanks for joining us here on the Monday edition. You know, it was only 2 months ago that Paramount's David Ellison was teasing the company's potential purchase of Warner Brothers Discovery. In fact, said so when he was speaking to Bloomberg's Lucas Shaw at the Bloomberg Screen Time event, shedding some light on his relationship with the Trump administration. Listen.
We have a good relationship with the administration. And look, I think if you look to that, I do believe Other things that have been rumored about, right, are very large-scale players that could potentially create monopolies, obviously, in the ecosystem. And again, I think when you look at the lens of consolidation, for us, I'll keep going back to it, it's always, how do you create long-term value creation? How do you put yourself in a position to produce more content, not less? And how do you ultimately build something that is better for the consumer?
All right, let's talk it out right now with Bloomberg's Chris Palmeri. Chris, thank you for joining us here. I'm wondering what the conversation is in Hollywood. We've got our own here in Washington, and it has all to do with antitrust, the Ellisons' relationship with Donald Trump, and now the emergence of Jared Kushner. How are you seeing it there?
Very differently, actually. While all of that stuff's intriguing to the folks in Los Angeles, here they mostly care about jobs, and there's a lot to say about that. Yeah. And also about movie theaters, because everyone here really loves the movie business and likes to see their movies released in theaters. And that's not historically been Netflix's strategy. So I would say those two things are the biggest issues with this deal here.
Interesting. Well, you know, some think that it would be the end of the movie business as we know it, that theaters would be going out of business if it was the Netflix merger. But we're in a world, in some cases, where Netflix is putting some of its productions on the big screen as well. Is it as simple as that?
No, nothing is simple about this deal, I can tell you. Netflix has said that it's going to run Warner Brothers, should it acquire it, much like it is currently, meaning, you know, big movies like Batman and Harry Potter and that are still going to go to theaters. And Netflix, you know, releases some movies in theaters. It's usually short runs. They're trying to qualify for award seasons, Oscars, and things like that. So, Netflix is basically saying that both arms will be run in their fashion. But they've also suggested that the amount of time a movie spends in theaters, which is they want to get the movies online as fast as possible. So that may shrink in the future. And, you know, all of that concerns certainly movie theater owners, but even the talent that loves to see their images on the big screen.
Kind of ironic, isn't it, that we all went out of our way to cut the cord so we could save money, and now we're very busy trying to put it all back together again.
100%, yeah. We're paying as much. We're having a harder time finding stuff. And by the way, you can't skip the commercials. So it's definitely not as much fun as we thought it was going to be.
So much for that, Chris. Thank you. Bloomberg's Chris Palmeri speaking truth from Hollywood as we turn overseas now. And one of the other major stories that we're following today, President Volodymyr Zelensky meeting with French, German, and British leaders in London today amid what Kyiv's European allies describe as a decisive time in the U.S.-led effort to end Russia's war in Ukraine. Still, British Prime Minister Keir Starmer is being cautiously optimistic after today's talks. Spokesperson for the PM saying, quote, "This is the furthest we've gotten in 4 years. And we welcome the fact that these talks are continuing at every level," adding, "It isn't a straight line between conflict and peace." Meantime, Zelensky today says talks between the U.S. and Ukraine have yet to come up with an agreement on the territorial control of several of Ukraine's eastern regions. Meantime, Finland's Foreign Minister, Elina Valtonen, joined the early edition of Balance of Power today. Here's what she told us about the state of the war.
I'm a little bit worried now, to be honest, what the next days and weeks will bring, in the sense that, of course, we, just like the Ukrainians, want to have peace as soon as possible, but not at any cost.
Joining us now with more is Julianne Smith, former U.S. ambassador to NATO and former deputy national security advisor to President Biden. Ambassador, welcome to Bloomberg TV and radio. It's great to have you as part of our conversation. I was struck by the words as well of Donald Trump last evening on the red carpet at the Kennedy Center. He was there to host the Kennedy Center honors, and he said that he was disappointed in Volodymyr Zelensky for not failing to accept this deal, but for even reading it. I'm not sure how he would know that, but it doesn't feel like anything is changing here, is it?
Well, look, we've seen 3 weeks of all sorts of meetings on both sides of the Atlantic. Of course, we had Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner going to Moscow to sit down directly with President Putin. There have been engagements in Florida and multiple capitals. Today, Zelensky was in London to meet with the European leaders. But despite all of this activity, it doesn't feel like we're any closer to peace in Ukraine. We still do not have that middle ground between Russia and Ukraine. Ukraine. And the real sticking point appears to be territory that Russia doesn't control today, but wants to take control over in the future. Zelensky now indicating that he is not willing, most likely, to give up territory that Russia doesn't hold. So unfortunately, after all of these high-level meetings, it's hard to see the prospect for some sort of a breakthrough between Moscow and Kyiv.
Well, when you hear the president speaking about Zelensky to the extent that he did, I'm a little bit disappointed. He hasn't yet read the proposal. Russia, I believe, is fine with it, he said, Ambassador, but I'm not sure that Zelensky is fine with it. He's not getting any closer to Vladimir Zelensky. Is Donald Trump getting closer to Vladimir Putin?
Well, I think if you take the original 28-point plan that we saw rolled out supposedly and drafted by the United States, it looks very similar to what Russia wanted before the war even started. When I was in Brussels in the fall of 2021, Russia made many of those demands that Ukraine give up any of its attempts to become a member of the NATO alliance, that Ukraine surrender right off the bat. And so when you look at what's on paper, it does feel to me like the agreement as drafted tilts towards Moscow's demands. I feel that the Ukrainians have given up several concessions. They're willing to go to the negotiating table without a ceasefire. They're willing to give up some territory. Zelensky has said that a number of times. My question back to Moscow is, what concessions are the Russians actually willing to make? And then to the United States, is the United States going to tighten the screws a little bit on Moscow to push Putin to make those concessions to get to peace? Right now, I'm not under the impression that the Trump administration is willing or able to apply that kind of pressure on Moscow.
Well, it's interesting. I don't know if we're going to be having a serious conversation about sanctions anytime soon, Ambassador. We've been talking about it for months now, much to Lindsey Graham's disappointment, I'm sure. But there's something else happening in the annual Defense Authorization Act. There are a couple of components in there that would help Ukraine. This just dropped last evening on the Hill. Strict limits on troop reductions in Europe and South Korea, but also $400 million for Ukraine security assistance. That doesn't sound like a country, in this case the U.S., that's about to abandon Ukraine, does it?
Not at all. I was very encouraged by what came out in the draft NDAA. It shows that there actually is pretty solid bipartisan support for Ukraine. The fact that they put in a couple of provisions for the United States to not only continue supporting Ukraine, but to continue a troop presence in Europe so that we can continue to deter Russian aggression. And there was language in there to make sure that the U.S. continues to support those three Baltic states that, of course, are right next to Ukraine's border and are feeling the impact of that war.
We, in fact, spoke with the foreign minister of Finland today about the administration's approach to Europe. Is it one thing, then, the way the Trump White House talks about our European allies, and a different thing about the way it's acting, in this case, through legislation?
Well, again, I think if you turn to Congress, you see considerable support among Republicans and Democrats for the NATO alliance, for working closely with our friends in Europe through the European Union, and for strong support for Ukraine until this war can come to an end, hopefully sooner rather than later. But that is not reflected in the current administration's policy. Your viewers and listeners probably heard that the United States, the Trump administration, just released a new national security strategy. And if you read the section on that's in pretty stark contrast with what we saw come out of Congress with this draft NDAA yesterday. So the question for the United States is, which is it? Are we going to lean towards our European allies, support Ukraine in this moment and do the right thing? Or will we see Europe somehow as one of our adversaries, a corner of the world that we want to be more distant from? I'm not exactly sure that the administration knows which policy it wants to pursue. But if you read that national security strategy, to me, it did feel alarming in that sense, in the stance it took on Europe.
Yeah, Russia seemed pretty pleased with the way that came out. I guess as a diplomat yourself, how you're looking at this administration, I'd love to hear you describe this, whether this is an administration that is having a problem playing both sides fairly, or if this is the art of the deal.
Well, there's a couple things to unpack there. One, who's at the negotiating table? I mean, look, Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner have been wildly successful in their careers, very capable by their own right. But the question is, are those two the best people to put across the table from President Putin? This guy was a member of the KGB. He knows how to manipulate his guests. He is a champion negotiator, and he pushes to get what he wants. I'd like to see some people at the table that know more about how Putin operates, more about Russia as a player on the world stage, and aren't just focused on getting a quick deal, but that will take the time to make sure that this is done right so that Russia doesn't do this again. Russia went into Ukraine in 2014, let's not forget, and then it came back in 2022, and we want to ensure that this never happens again. So diplomacy takes a lot of work. It takes a lot of depth, expertise. You want to take your time. And I would also suggest that we include our European allies in these efforts, because of course they're the ones that are supporting Ukraine the most at this moment. Many of them are buying American capabilities to send to Ukraine, and I support that. I think it's a great idea. But we want to make sure that those countries that are working to support Ukraine are included in this negotiation. So I do think this needs not to be rushed. We have to avoid just focusing on the U.S.-Russia economic relationship and do what's right for Ukraine to ensure that Russia never touches Ukrainian territory again.
Julianne Smith, former U.S. ambassador to NATO. It's great to have you, Ambassador. Thank you for the insights. Coming up, tensions are rising on Capitol Hill as lawmakers race to find a health care solution before prices spike for millions of Americans. And the breaking news this hour, President Trump greenlighting Nvidia H200 chips to China. It's on. And we'll discuss with our political panel next on Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio. I'm Joe Matthew in Washington. Thanks for joining us. We'll have more on the fight for Warner Brothers Discovery when we convene our political panel next. But first, the stories we're watching in today's Power Brief. The Supreme Court is signaling it is poised to give the president a win, control over potentially dozens of traditionally independent federal agencies after casting doubt on a 90-year-old precedent. Came to a head today when the court heard oral arguments in Trump versus Slaughter. The administration arguing over what it says is its right to remove the last remaining Democrat from the Federal Trade Commission, Rebecca Slaughter. The president originally removed Slaughter from her post in March, and no timetable has been given on when the court could rule on the case. Shake-up in the Texas congressional elections. Former U.S. Representative Colin Allred is out, dropping out of the Senate primary this morning, opting instead to run for a Dallas seat in the House of Representatives, following new congressional maps being allowed to proceed by the Supreme Court. Allred's decision here came as U.S. Representative Jasmine Crockett, an effective fundraiser with a big social media following, announced earlier that she will be joining the race for Senate, facing off against Texas State Representative James Talrico for the Democratic nomination. Joining us now with their reaction to all these stories and a lot more, this evening's political panel, Bloomberg Politics contributors Rick Davis, a Republican strategist and partner at Stone Court Capital, alongside Democratic analyst Jeannie Shanzano, democracy visiting fellow at Harvard Kennedy School's Ash Center. I'm just going to start with this Texas race because this is a doozy today. Jeannie, to start with you, is Jasmine Crockett that influential that she knocks off a candidate even before the announcement? It was only a report this morning when Colin Allred called it quits.
It was. And what we're hearing from Colin Allred is he and other Democrats were particularly concerned about this 2-month runoff they have in Texas and the millions of dollars that Democrats would spend fighting each other that they couldn't then spend fighting Donald Trump, as they put it, and the Republican, whoever wins that primary on the other side. And so that's why he said he dropped out. Now, he hasn't endorsed Jasmine Crockett, but he describes her as a friend, and he all but said that Tallarico should consider getting out like he did.
You know, she just made this official, Rick Davis, in the form of a video announcement. That's what you do now. This one is curious. I believe it's only 30 seconds. And if you're with us on the radio, I want you to just picture Jasmine Crockett looking off to the horizon, a profile shot. You will not hear her voice. This is what you hear.
How about this new one they have, their new star, Crockett? How about her? She's the new star of the Democrat Party, Jasmine Crockett. They're in big trouble.
But you have this woman, Crockett. She's a very low IQ person.
I watched her speak the other day. She's definitely a low IQ person. Crockett.
She turns to the camera right there when he says her name. And right before it fades to the closing graphic, you get a quick smirk. Not a word, Rick. What do you make of this method?
Yeah, not a word from her. It's all the audio is Donald Trump insulting her. I think it's too cute by half. You know, you got to think about who's her audience. Now, she's obviously grabbing audience share out of the national press.
Yeah.
That's what this was for.
Okay.
This is not for convincing Texans to vote for her for Senate.
This is for us.
And this is all for the media. I'm not going to say us. And anyway, I think it's effective. We're talking about it. It's going to get some airtime, but it's not a campaign commercial. It's not a spot that you'd play to try and get people in Southwest Texas to consider you for the first time. She's clearly going to make it about Trump, not herself.
Right.
And that may be a good strategy because she's so progressive that she probably doesn't connect with the vast majority of Texans. So, you know, this is a great way to start a campaign if you don't want anybody to know what your positions are.
Okay, so Jeannie, is that right? If that's the case, what is she running for? And if you're a progressive, what are you doing running against Trump in Texas?
Yeah, Joe, I'm about to look off to this side and then slowly turn and face both of you. You know, I think from her view, and she's been very clear about her strategy here, is she has a view that no Democrat can win Texas statewide. They haven't in 30 years unless they expand the electorate dramatically. And they've seen that happen with President Trump nationwide. They've seen that happen with Mamdani to a certain extent in New York City. And that's what she's trying to emulate. And I think we're seeing Democrats looking for a new way to do that. And that is using somebody with a big voice and a lot to say and a lot of social media presence like Jasmine Crockett to get the word out. So that's what I think we're seeing. And you contrast with that with Tallarico or some of the more establishment view of how this is done. And they're saying, no, it's not only about expanding the electorate, it's about crossovers. You've got to bring moderates, independents over. But I think that's what we're seeing is this debate in the Democratic Party as to how they can, for once in a generation, take back a statewide seat in Texas. And I think they're going to try something new with her this time. And her first commercial certainly speaks to that and the fact that they're trying to attract young voters.
Well, this will be a bruiser, as Colin Allred said himself. I want to ask you both about the big deal of the day. And Rick, your thoughts as the president reportedly thumbs the scale on this purchase of Warner Brothers, but I'm not sure who he's thumbing it for. He was criticizing Paramount on Truth Social this morning because of 60 Minutes last night, despite the fact that Jared Kushner's putting up some of the money behind the Ellison family he's very close to. How can you figure out the direction this is going in? What are you looking for?
Yeah, this is a tough one to handicap based on the last 24 hours. You would have thought the Ellisons had the inside track. Seemed like that was where it was going until they put Marjorie Taylor Greene on CBS. And then, boom, that blew that up. Now it seems like that thumb's on both sides of the scale, and he'll direct it. But, look, at the end of the day, and you'd be naive to think that this isn't something that Donald Trump's not going to get intimately involved in. He is a creature of television. Right. He is a producer. And so he's going to look at this through his production eyes. And I think ultimately, regardless of the relationships,
his instincts in television are going to be what makes the day.
Well, or maybe, which network does the next documentary about Melania Trump, as Netflix already did? Jeannie, are we going to start seeing that kind of activity coming from both Netflix and Paramount?
Yeah, that's the danger here when you have one individual in control of the mammoth executive branch and given the power without independent voices, regulators there to control it, that everybody is trying to get cozy with Donald Trump or whoever the next president is to get their way. And I think that's what we saw. Rebecca Slaughter, you were just talking about her, when she filed this lawsuit. She said, I watched the inauguration. He was standing not with world leaders, but CEOs of the biggest companies that the United States was currently in contentious lawsuits with, trying to get cozy with him. And that's not going to serve the American public, and that's what people are concerned about with that case. And this deal speaks to that. Donald Trump stood at the Kennedy Center last night and said, I'm going to put my thumb on the scale of this, and I'm going to do it in a big way because, to Rick's point, this is something he cares an awful lot about. And so I think it is dangerous for consumers, and it's dangerous if Republicans want this now. Will they want it if a Democrat is in office in 28 or 32?
Yeah. Well, there's a lot of business being directed out of the White House today. We started our conversation this hour with Nvidia's H200 chips being cleared for sale in China. But it's the economy he's going to have to be speaking about tomorrow. The president's on his way not only to Pennsylvania, but to Scranton, almost taking a page out of Joe Biden's playbook. Rick Davis, is this going to work for Donald Trump?
Well, it didn't work for Joe Biden, and I don't think it's going to work for Donald Trump. Both have the same problem, that consumers don't believe a thing they're hearing from the administration, either the Biden administration or the Trump administration. They want to see change. They don't care about rhetoric. Somebody showing up for the first time and talking about affordability isn't going to impress them. Consumers are grumpy. They're angry. They're unhappy with their current situation. You just look at the Michigan Consumer Sentiment Index. It's at one of its lowest levels since 2020. And that's the wind that Donald Trump's going to have in his face when he stands up in Scranton and tries to tell people he cares about affordability.
That's right. Well, in which he calls a Democrat con job. Jeannie, what's going to be the message from Donald Trump when he goes to Pennsylvania tomorrow? Prices are down. You just don't feel it?
That's what I'm so curious about. To your point, Joe, he stood there and said it's a Democratic hoax. It's a con job, affordability, on and on. Scott Bessent said that over the weekend on Sunday, it's a Democratic hoax. Well, if that's the case, how are you then going to stand up there and convince people that you are helping them out if you don't even feel their pain or believe their pain? So how he threads that needle, I think, is going to be a big question. But I think the fact that this is in the 7th and 8th district in Pennsylvania, this county he's going to, and those are two of the very few seats that are up for grabs next term, our next election in the midterm, I think speaks to how important he sees the midterm, and he is going back out on the trail for almost the first time in several months because he knows he's at risk.
Oh, someone tell Michael Scott the political roadshow is coming back to Scranton. Gigi Shanzano and Rick Davis, great to see you both. Our fantastic panel. Check out the Washington Edition newsletter. You can find it on the terminal and online. And I'll meet you back here tomorrow on Balance of Power, Pennsylvania Day. This is Bloomberg TV and Radio.